Philadelphia and Anchorage and I believe San Francisco and other places tonight. And we just want to get information out. We do these kind of events to get information out about the wildlands in Alaska, which are so precious and disappearing, and are some of the great wildlands left in the world that are really vanishing from the face of the earth. And with the push from Congress right now to drill for more oil, to go into the Arctic Ocean, to go into places like the reserve, to go into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, for the excuse that we can bring down the price of oil, which reality really is this, any oil we get out of it is going to get thrown onto the open market and will not have a big impact on the price of oil for Americans. But what it will do is really destroy or damage some of these precious, precious areas. Like we saw in the film tonight. We saw the polar bears are struggling because the ice is disappearing, and we really need to do something about climate change. So that's our mission.
You know, the land can't speak for itself. The caribou can't speak for themselves. And, you know, decisions about what's going to happen to the wilderness are being made by people who never go there. And the Wilderness League is, you know, I think it may be the only lobbying group, full-time lobbying group for Alaska in Washington. But this place, I mean, the Petroleum Reserve, it's really different. I mean, I think, you know, in 12 years, I don't think I have seen 30 people.
Wow.
On my trips. And, you know, the idea that there's this place that exists without human development, where you, I mean, it's really amazing. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, you think, I mean, it's hard to, I mean, I've sort of devoted myself now to promoting the place, to protect the place. And I, you know, it's kind of, say, you know, you're up there and you see, and you think that, and you think, well, you know, there's war, and there's famine, and there's disease. I mean, there are zillions of problems that face the humanity besides saving the caribou.
Right. So how do you place more value in a caribou than, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think first,
human?
you know, first of all, you know, I would go with, you know, there are people who would say that a caribou and a human being are on equal footing. You know, that an opposable thumb and a brain doesn't make you superior necessarily.
Right.
But if you think that protecting that place is the right thing to do, and if you take a step in the right direction, your next step is going to be in the right direction. You know, that if you ask the right answers, you ask the right questions, you'll get the right answers. So there is I think there's a real connection between protecting the place, protecting the land, and all of the other stuff that follows. You know, do you know what I mean? I mean that if you, you know, I mean, really what it comes down to up there, it's about money and oil. That's what threatens the place. And if you think about all of the chaos and death and destruction that oil creates in the world, then keeping, you know, stopping it means you stop it everywhere. I mean, do you know what I'm saying?
I do, and I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So I think, you know, but I'm.
So if you know, last weekend I think Obama, you decided to start reopening up leasing.
Right.
What would if you were to
You
be
know,
face to face with Obama?
what would I say?
What would be your?
I would say don't care.
You had your minute.
If I had my minute, it's, you know, it's not worth it. It just isn't. You know, and it's, I mean, up there. I mean, imagine, you know, you're in this place. There's 24 hours of sunlight, and in 20 years, you'll know how much the sunlight costs. You know, 20 years you won't know how much oil costs, right? So here's the sun. It's shining all the time. The wind is blowing all the time. Our solution to energy problems is to bring all of this infrastructure, you know, spend zillions and zillions of dollars, expend all sorts of energy to bring all of this infrastructure up, to dig down into the earth and find this stuff that's buried, pump it up, pump it out, you know, and then pump it into the sky. It doesn't make any sense at all, you know, except that when you see how much money is involved, you know, it's, you know, I mean, I'd like to think that we could stop it. But the billions and billions of dollars of money and investment that's there, and all the profit that's been being made, it's not going to stop. So I would say to Obama that he could be one person who doesn't cave into that stuff. Especially since the most recent predictions about what's there. There's lots of gas in the northwestern Arctic. There is not nearly as much oil as they thought. I mean, it was something like 860. I shouldn't quote a number if I'm not sure what it is, but it's way less than they thought.
And we wouldn't have access to it for.
Yeah, and it's not like it comes. I mean, it's interesting. We wouldn't have access to it. B, the American oil companies have been very disinterested in exploration up there. Shell's given up a bunch of its leases, and then the last few leases have been bought by Norwegian companies, Italian companies, Chinese companies, and the oil is just going to go into the global market. I mean, it's just about profit. That's what it's about. And I think that there are other things to be. There's another way to look at value. But anyway, I got connected with them. I was going to Alaska. I was interested in speaking out about the land, and they were interested in the National Petroleum Reserve, where I'd spent some time. And there's very few people go there. Most of the environmental attention has been focused on the wildlife refuge, which is, infinitely smaller, which, is kind of irrelevant that it's smaller. I mean, but all of this attention has been focused on the wildlife refuge, and very little attention has been focused on the National Petroleum Reserve.
And that's because the policies that are in place currently allow for development there.
Right. I mean, that it's open for leasing. Though they didn't start leasing in the Petroleum Reserve until 2000.
Was that the end of the Clinton administration?
End of the Clinton administration and the beginning of the Bush administration, and under Cheney's energy plan, they really started to push selling the leases up there. Anyway, the league wanted someone to create, to capture some photography and video of the place, and so they supported a 90-day trip where I started basically on one side of the Petroleum Reserve, the headwaters of the Colville River, and paddled maybe 450 miles to the Beaufort Sea in the village of New Ixet, and filmed. And I think that probably sums it up. I mean, I think that the thing about it, I think that's most difficult to understand is how intrusive any development is there. I mean, even watching this film, the idea that, and I mean, I know the helicopter pilot, he's a great guy, his head's in the right spot, but he's making a lot of noise, I mean, it's not as, I mean, anything that goes there affects what it's like. And
because it's so fragile.
Because it's fragile, but it's resilient. I mean, it's not, which is part of what's so wonderful about it, is that there are things that, the place is incredibly successful within a narrow window. And you change the window, and all of a sudden the thing starts to fall apart. And it's, talking about climate change, right? Climate change changes it, but any kind of development changes it. I mean, it just becomes a whole different place. And I think, there's a certain hypocrisy for me to go there. And, when I go there, I'm one person too many. Though I'm my background as a photographer was that, initially the National Park System was created by photographers who went there and took pictures of the place and proved that it was beautiful. And I think that, people need to see it, and then people need to leave it alone. I don't know if that helps you.
Thank you so much. If you were to be confronted by someone who says, well, the bears, they might go extinct, but how does that really impact me as an individual living here in Boston? Um, so what? Why should we spend money protecting an animal like that?
Someone may not actually care about the bear, and well, that's their choice. However, what's causing the question about the fate of the bear has definite ripple effects that go all the way to Boston, and in several forms. So I said earlier this evening that we can look at the bear as sort of the canary. You know, it tells us something is changing in the mind, and why could we connect that all the way to Boston? Well, again, the Arctic is warming twice as fast as other areas, so these sorts of dramatic changes will come first to the Arctic, and they may be strongest, but that doesn't mean they won't come here. But in addition, those same changes, I mentioned a loss of sea ice, and that sea ice is forming later, leaving earlier. Well, the more open water that one has in the autumn, and you saw Hudson Bay not freezing up until February, the more open water that the Arctic has in the late autumn and early winter, the more the Arctic conditions, actually, it may seem contradictory, can be conveyed further south. That is to say, when that open water allows then the exchange of temperature between the atmosphere and the ocean, it doesn't keep what we call the Arctic polar vortex as tightly connected. So those cold air masses now sweep further south. This past winter we had snow and cold conditions throughout much of the central and north U.S. And in some cases we had record snows. Well, those cold conditions and moist conditions led to snow, while further north we were setting warm records all across the southern Arctic. Villages in Canada, in the Nunavut region of Canada, were recording record warm. So with less ice, the conditions that keep the Arctic climate sort of intact are weakened, and we see more of that cold air mass spilling south. But another way that what happens in the Arctic is really going to affect other parts of the world, everywhere, the coastline, every small island, is that losing not the sea ice, but ice on land in the Arctic is raising sea level. And you look at the projections now for sea level rise during the course of the current century, and they range, not surprisingly, because there are huge uncertainties about how humans will continue to affect the climate, but a business as usual scenario, just keep moving as we are today. Sea level could rise anywhere from something or about 2.5 to more than 3 feet. And a good portion of that increase is coming from the melting of ice on land that then flows to the ocean and raises sea level. And it raises sea level everywhere, not just in the Arctic. So it's a long answer, but those changes that look like, well, they could affect the Arctic ecosystem, really are going to have effects on our climate and our sea level and coastlines all the way across the temperate regions where we live, and sea level really reaching globally in every way.